Going back into this tutorial, you can see I've sped it up quite a bit. You can see I'm using a smaller brush to go into the details and establish where things are, and then I'll slow it down to show you what I do when I go into the face and a little bit of the hair. With the face, I'm relying on a little bit of green, burnt sienna, a rose, and burnt umber. And I'm using water to adjust the values. So at the very top left of the forehead, I notice that there's a bit of green reflecting into the edge of the forehead, and that's where I'll start with a number 7 or 8 round. And then on the right side, I notice that it's actually a little bit more blue than the left side. It's a subtle difference, but it makes a difference. And I'm leaving the center of that forehead to be lighter, as that's where the light is actually hitting from the sun. No, I'm just adding water to soften the edges so there's a smooth transition between the two values. And then I'm adding a rose with a bit of green in it to the bottom of the cheek where the dress is reflecting into the cheek. And the chin, the same thing. There's rose reflecting into the chin. I'm going my first pass on the chin and underneath the neck. I'm not drawing a line to the divided neck. I'm actually just using the values that are there. You can see I'm mixing some green, some rose, some burnt sienna, a little bit of red, and then I'm going to go into the eye area. The eye sockets sit lower in the face, and they're going to have a shadow. So that is why I mixed in green, which is a cool color, into warm colors. It neutralizes the warm colors, and it creates more of a shadow. So when I go into the eye socket area, I'm not going to do any big details. I'm just adding the shapes of what I see in my portrait. The subject matter has her eyes closed, and therefore I don't really need to paint the white of her eye. So I'm using the same color to define the edge of the nostrils. I will not outline the nostrils. I'll just define where the nose actually sits against the face, using a small brush. And then a little bit underneath and above the lip. I'm defining the interior line of the lip where the two lips meet, creating a space so that when I do go back to add some red, I'll have a place to put it. And I'm making sure that when I do add shadows that I soften the shadows. In this particular case, the lighting is soft and a bit diffused, so I don't need to add strong shadows, but there are shadows nonetheless. And within the eye, the darkest point is really against the bone on the interior of the eye, and then it gets lighter as it goes out towards the ear. And I'm looking for the shapes and where the folds of the eyelid are and how far the actual shadow goes out. And again, it diffuses as it goes towards the ear. So I'm going to try to get this into one shot. I don't want to lift in this area because it can get really messy. Being a small area like this, you really want to be sure about what you're doing before you actually go into it. So practice it before you do it, and then go ahead and directly paint. The right side of the eye, I noticed that the eye socket has more green in it. And my guess would be in this particular subject, the green grass is reflecting into the shadow. And because the light is showing on that side, I'm adding a little bit more green. And I'm not neutralizing it as much. It's still neutral, but not as neutral as compared to the left side of the face. And a little bit of rose in there. Right now, it seems like she has black eyes, but that is because I haven't really added the warmer colors to the cheeks and to the forehead. So it feels strange, and it's in an awkward area time in the painting. But that's what the reference is telling me to do. So I have to trust that when I add the rest of the colors, these colors will make sense as well. Underneath the nose, I'm adding a little bit of rose in a few little places there. There are some reflections of the dress in the face, especially the chin and the nose. And I'm going into the edge of the nose. I'm not defining the nostrils. I don't see the nostrils, therefore I don't need to define them. And I'm not using black to do any of these details. I'm using color. When I go into the lips, the top lip will always be darker than the bottom lip. The bottom lip comes out further and therefore it catches more light. So when I do this, I'll make sure to note that. I'm using a cadmium red and a rose. And for the lower lip, I'll use a cadmium red and a cadmium red light and a rose. And I'm keeping the edges of the lips really soft, unless I'm looking at a subject who has their lips lined. The edges of the lips are very soft because they are round and they curve out. So round objects, soft edges. So I'll drag a little bit of the rose up into that area as well. This is my first pass of the lips, so I'll go back and forth on it. There's a little bit of push and pull between the lights and darks on this that I don't think I'll get right away. So I know going into this that I'm doing some layering and I'm looking at light, and I might add some white into that lower lip so that it's a little brighter and a little lighter in pastel. Every lip that you paint is going to be different. It's really a matter of being observant of your subject. Same with every face is different. So really looking at what your shapes are, your values are, where the light is, the direction of the light, the temperatures of the colors. These are all things that will help make your subject more realistic, as well as more true to the actual subject matter that you're painting. I've been coming back into this little area. I'm dragging in color as it dries. I'm adding extra layers. And I'll continue to do so until I feel that this area has been established. I just add a little bit of peach towards the hairline. In younger people, you tend to see a bit more peach around the edge of the hairline. And I'm adding the white into the bottom lip so that it's a little bit lighter. Again, these are areas that you don't want to lift. If you lift a red lip, it's very easy for the red to spread into the rest of the painting, and once the red has spread, it acts as a stain and it will not get out. So try to be precise and practice beforehand. You can shift things, but by minuscule amounts, as opposed to lifting something big and something in ultramarine blue. And I'm going back into that nose and just bringing in some of those other colors as I see the color developing. And again, I'm going back into the left side to add those shadows. It's really just working in stages where you let things dry and then you go back and forth between them, and you'll start seeing the color develop that way. I'm working on very pale skin, so for me, I'm trying to keep as much of the light of the skin and reflections of the skin as possible. That's why I'm working in such thin layers. If I was trying to establish somebody with a darker skin, I would still work in thin layers in the beginning, but then I would push darker contrast. Whereas this, I'm really having to be very light-handed and very careful. going back into the hairline and getting in some of those little fine line hairs at the top that you see, especially on young children. So I'm using a small brush. I'm going to speed it up. And you'll see that I'm going in and I'm making sure that the head is right. I'm re-examining my picture. And I'm adding purple and burnt umber and blue, because these are the colors that I see coming out on the hair. And the light is coming from above, so again, I'm going to see my lightest lights at the top of the head and the darkest darks below, where the hair is sort of tucking into the neck. And then I'm establishing where those little curls are that come around the sides. And I don't need a ton of detail, but I am adding a few more areas of detail. Grabbing a paper towel, sometimes you have little water that drops. So I'm just dragging a glaze over that top of that lip. I want it to be light because it is coming out from the face, sticking out from the face, but it shouldn't be the white of the paper. It should have some value to it. And if I go too dark, I can just add water and move it around. Because I'm using such little paint right now, I have a little bit more control. And I'm not working wet into wet, I'm working wet into semi-wet. So there is some movement within the canvas, within the paper, but it's not bleeding. I have control over it because I'm working in a small area. I'm going back into the eyes now. The eyes have dried already. So I'm finding out where that actual eyelid comes out and in with color. The closer it is to the side of the bone of the nose, it gets a little darker. And then, as I said, it diffuses. There is, because there's a lower lit eyelid underneath, there is some color underneath that. And I'm doing the eyelashes. So I'm using burnt umber and ultramarine blue, and I'm using a very small brush, and I'm being very careful. And I'm not using really hard lines, but I'm using more scratchy, sketchy lines, like the top of the baby hair of the forehead. And I'll speed it up and do the same to the other side. When you're doing the eyelashes, trying to make them a little bit irregular. You don't want them all going the same direction. You want to observe that eyelashes aren't just pointy things, but very thin, refined lines. And that's it.